Hello friends and enemies, and welcome back to another video. Today we are going into a highly requested video. I gotta say thanks to Advire Tubbs for sticking around long enough to see me start talking about the nature episodes. Yes, in this video we are going to be covering Nature Part 1. We start this episode off with the aftermath of Orel being disciplined by Clay, and Orel is disappointed to hear that Clay is done lecturing him. As we talked about before in some of my previous videos, disciplining Orel is really the only thing that Clay does as an active father. It's the only time that Orel actually gets any sort of meaningful interactions with his father. It's clear throughout the whole series that Orel really does wholeheartedly want some wisdom and life advice from his father. That is often why Orel ends up getting in the hijinks of the episode, because he takes the advice his father gives him in a way that was not intended by Clay. If Orel didn't respect or care about what his father would say during his lectures, then he would never have gotten into the situations he ends up being in the series. Moving on, Clay and Orel spend a moment looking at the deer mounted in his study, and this is when Clay suggests that they go on a father-son outing. He tells Orel that it's about time he teaches him how to shoot a gun. Clay mentions how hunting is a way that people can play God, and this makes sense for Clay's character. Hunting for him is a time where he doesn't have to be himself, where he doesn't have to be the self-loathing alcoholic father in a dead marriage, raising two kids, one who isn't even his, where he can get away from it all and take control of something for once in his life, where he doesn't have to be the naive child who ended up killing his mother in a heart attack that led to his father hating him, and where the only acknowledgement that he would get was in the form of physical discipline. It's clear that Clay is very excited to share this joy of his with his son, even though to us as the viewer we can see that Orel is clearly uncomfortable with guns for one, and two, taking the life of a living being is also something that Orel is uncomfortable with. But in typical Clay fashion, he disregards his son's feelings and continues on to show his son his gun collection, even showcasing Old Gunny, a Puppington family heirloom, telling Orel about the tradition of passing off the gun to the firstborn son. And while Old Gunny is in Orel's hands, we get to see the weight of it. Not just the physical weight, but the emotional weight that it holds for Orel. His face is in awe and contempt. It's a symbol of his father's approval and recognition, but at the same time, guns are something that Orel is very uncomfortable with. And before Orel even has the chance to fully process or make up his mind on how he feels about it, Clay takes the gun out of his hand and replaces it with a random pistol, and Orel gives a disappointed "oh" in response. As we saw in one of my previous videos on the episode, The Passing, Clay's father, Arthur, never did properly pass down the gun to his son. Being spiteful of his son for causing the death of his mother, he said that he was ending the tradition and how he will not take Clay on the rite of passage that was the hunting trip. So it is somewhat understandable why Clay would not want his son to carry around that symbol of Clay's pain. But following that same train of thought, I don't see why he told the whole history of the weapon and the importance of the father-son hunting trip. Personally, I feel like passing off the gun to his son would be a good way for Clay to move past the dark past that it represents for him and instead replace it with a meaningful trip with his real son. In the next scene, we see Clay has already packed the car for the trip and belittles Orel for bringing a pack full of useful survival equipment and medical supplies. The only thing that he lets Orel bring is his favorite lucky shirt, the shirt that he was wearing when he realized that God doesn't just love him but his whole family as well. In the car ride to the forest, Orel attempts to have a conversation with his dad, but he just turns on the radio. Orel is disappointed by this and he ends up looking out the window to see a crane flying by. I believe this crane represents Orel's purity and innocence. They arrive at the campsite and Clay sets up a nice little tent for his liquor bottles and starts to trip off with a nice drink. Orel understandably is a bit off-put by this but doesn't say anything. A bit confused by his father's ramblings, he just agrees with what he is saying, and even perks up when Clay says that he might let him use his lucky rifle. In the next scene, we see Clay pointing at a rabbit, signaling to Orel that he wants him to use the rifle to shoot it. The same crane that Orel saw on the way there is behind him, serving as a witness. Orel is very hesitant to pull the trigger, and Clay looks at him with frustration. And sure enough, Orel does not pull the trigger and ends up giggling as more rabbits arrive along with butterflies. Orel is at peace and enjoying nature's beauty, but Clay is just frustrated that his son didn't kill anything and takes another drink, ruining Orel's happiness with just one look. We get a few more scenes of Orel and Clay out in nature, Clay being the one to try and get him to shoot an animal, and each time Orel fails to do so, he drinks more, seeming to utterly hate that his son actually enjoys nature and doesn't just like to be out in the woods to kill things like his father. Clay even goes as far to say that the animals are the enemy, while Orel is able to see the animals as beautiful, most likely due to them being God's creations. Clay sees them as filthy and disgusting. Clay, in his frustration of his son, loving peace and nature, he drinks more and shoots his rifle, killing the deer that earlier was licking Orel. He is ecstatic to have killed something and even says that he wins. In the joyful drunk stupor, Clay goes on to shoot a hunting dog, even after Orel tried to explain to him that it's not a rabbit. Now, when Clay said that he wins after killing an animal, I think that it shows us more about how he views hunting for him. To be able to kill one of God's creations is like a win for him, a way for him to get back at God, because as we all know, Clay is a very resentful and spiteful man, and in all honesty probably hates God and blames him for how his life ended up being. Orel's a bit distraught and traumatized hearing the owner of the dog cry out in sadness at the death of his dog.
That's my dog!
Clay just gets him and rushes him back to the campsite, proudly mounting the dog's head on a tree. We then get to see Orel, who is clearly sad and upset about the situation, looking at the ground, while Clay, with not a care in the world, proceeds to take a bite out of the cooked leg of the dog. Because yes, Clay decided to cook the dog they just killed and eat it. A fly starts to fly around him as he eats, clearly very satisfied with himself. Orel tells his father that he is hungry, and is then informed that his father didn't bring any food, and that the only food they will eat is what they kill. He even mocks Orel, saying that it's a bit unfair that Orel gets to eat something he did not kill. He motions the leg of the dog in a way that makes it seem that if Orel begs for some food, he will let him have a bite. Clay goes on to say that they are surrounded by food that walks right up to them begging to be eaten. More flies can be seen flying around Clay at this time. Defeatedly, Orel says that he guesses he should try to kill something before looking over at his father drunkenly aiming a rifle backwards, then saying that it would be best if they just call it a day. Clay, in a voice full of resentment, says, "I thought so," before finishing another drink, angrily glaring at Orel. Orel struggles to tell his father that he thinks he is too drunk, and all Clay can do in response is internally explode for a bit, before saying in a very aggressive tone that drunk is nature.
Let me tell you something, Orel. Drunk is nature.
For one of the first times ever, we get to see Orel with an angry look at his face as he tells Clay that he is not really comfortable hunting with him at that moment, to which Clay only laughs off and says, "Have you ever tried hunting with you?" as he finishes his glass and then grabbing another bottle, flies sticking to his skin as he tells Orel that his cup is always half empty, and proceeds to tell Orel to look at him and that he should be more like him and look on the blight side of life. Orel says blight as if questioning if he heard him right, only for it to be confirmed by his father, saying that "I didn't say bright, I said blight." He says his life is sunny and blight. Bright means the opposite, it means sudden withering death, only to admit to himself that his life is full of bright, to which Orel corrects him by saying he means blight. Clay admits while covered in flies that he hates himself. Orel, with tears in his eyes, looks over at his father. Clay looks at his reflection in the bottle and shouts out, "Why do you quit working on me?
Why do you quit working on me?"
He then goes to rant angrily how she, in reference to the bottle, lies to him about making him feel better and serves more as something that traps him rather than making him happy. And partway through this rant, he starts shifting the way he talks. Instead of talking about the bottle, he starts talking about women, but in the similar fashion. How they latch onto you to get inside you and to get things out of you that end up serving as weights to keep you trapped for the rest of your life with no one to be. Clay lets out a scream that sounds like a soul in agony, while Orel looks at him, gun in his hand, while the crane has returned to watch over Orel in this moment. And then the sound of a shot being fired is heard while Orel cries out to his father. And before I give my final thoughts on this episode, I'd like to address a few elephants in the room. One being the new set I've made. Hopefully you guys like it. I spent a bit of time trying to decide how exactly I would polish up this channel a bit, and I think it came out pretty well. I'd love to hear what you guys think. Another one is the new music that's being used on the channel. It was made by a good friend of mine, Kyunghee. He has a SoundCloud, so I'll be linking that down below as well. He did the intro as well as the general background music for these videos that I'm going to be using now. And lastly, I might need to say thank you for the continued support of everyone out there who watches and looks forward to my videos. Times have been hectic and will continue to be so for a few months, in all likelihood, but that doesn't mean the videos will stop. Anyways, one thing I really wanted to mention about Clay and his rant there was Blubberto. His wife, the person who introduced him into alcohol in the episode Help. And once Clay starts drinking, he does become happy and is enjoying the wedding reception that they are at. And he enjoys the time that he spends with Blubberto. But over time, even at their own wedding, they both can be seen as not happy with life. They seem numb to it all. I think that Clay associates alcohol with Blubberto because, like I said, she was the one who introduced him to it, but also she was the one who wanted to help him. One of the brief moments that Blubberto seemed to be truly happy is when Clay said that she helped him during that wedding reception when they met. When she is later convincing Clay to marry her, she states that all she has been doing is help him since they met, and that he needs her so that she can help him and make his life better. This is what gets him to say that he should keep her, and Blubberto gets him to say that that is his version of a proposal. Now, if we look at the bottle of liquor as a symbol of Blubberto during Clay's rant, it all makes sense. Him saying how it promises him to make him feel better, only to have him in a stranglehold. How he is now trapped by it for the rest of his life. When Clay screams out, "Why do you stop working on me?" that could be seen as him venting his frustration about how Blubberto stopped trying to fix or help him in their life, how she has basically just given up on him. He even mentions how it manages to rip your guts out and get things out of you that serve as weights. This is probably him expressing his honest feelings about how he views his children, that he supports. He sees them as weights further trapping him in his unhappy life. Even with all the resentment, he still drinks liquor. He is dependent on the bottle to function, much like how he is dependent on Blubberto being there to help him. I don't think that Clay would be able to cook his own meals, do his laundry, keep his house looking decent, or even wake up for work on time if Blubberto wasn't there. He is unhappy with her in his situation, but he's dependent on her. And I think Orel was able to see that his father wasn't talking about the bottle itself during his rant. He could see how much pain Clay was in, and I think subconsciously, Orel ended up pulling the trigger to try and relieve Clay of that pain. I'd like to thank you all for watching. Please subscribe to the channel if you enjoyed the video. Make sure to leave a like as well, it helps a lot. I'd like to thank Nightingale Wednesday Nightmare for supporting me on Patreon. If you feel like supporting the channel as well, the link to that will also be in the description down below. And once again, thank you all. It's been a pleasure to know y'all, but now I gotta go.